The first time the Empire spoke of Earth, they called it a mistake. A footnote in a conquered galaxy. A primitive rock, cold and insignificant, tucked in some forgotten arm of a spiral. No one in the Imperial Council remembered the name of the species that once lived there. No one cared. But there was one word they did remember. Ashfall. A code name. A project. A whisper from a century ago. Classified. Buried. Dismissed as some failed attempt by early humans to resist before they were wiped out. That was the last time Earth was ever mentioned in Imperial records. Until now. Admiral Carvax stood on the command deck of the dreadnought Ravager of Light, flanked by his officers, the cold blue hue of hyperspace streaking across the glass before him. They were en route to Sector 9 Delta. Some mining colony had gone silent. Pirates, maybe. Insurgents, at worst. He barely looked up when a junior technician muttered, "Unscheduled contact. Just exited void space. Dead center of the system." "Another miner barge?" Carvax asked, not even shifting from his position. "No, sir. Not a barge. It's—" The technician squinted at the data flooding in. "It's a warship." Carvax turned. "Imperial?" The technician shook his head slowly. "No, it's unregistered. No beacon. No signature. Size comparable to a battlecruiser. Armor heavier than ours." It just appeared. Appeared. No warning. No ripple in the void. No jump signature. It didn't arrive. It was just there. Floating. Silent. Watching. Carvax stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Put it on screen." The view screen flickered, then resolved into the image of the unknown vessel. It was angular. Ugly. Brutal. Nothing sleek or elegant like the Empire's ships. Its armor looked bolted, not molded. Its cannons didn't swivel. They dared you to move. The hull bore no colors. No insignia, just black, scorched metal. No life signs detected. And across its spine, in jagged white lettering, one word was etched. Ashfall. The name hit like a gut punch. One of the senior officers dropped his datapad. Another whispered, "That's not possible." Carvax turned slowly. "What do you know?" The officer swallowed hard. "My grandfather told stories about Earth, about what they were building, before the Purge." Carvax's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ashfall was real?" "More than real. It was Earth's final message, not a ship, a promise." Aboard the Ashfall, the last son of Earth stood alone in the command cradle. He had no name anymore, only a designation. Lieutenant Commander Rook. Born in orbit, bred in silence, a product of the forgotten resistance, the child of survivors and scientists who had buried themselves deep beneath Earth's irradiated crust. They waited. For decades. Even after the Empire had deemed Earth a dead world. Ashfall had been built in darkness, with stolen tech, salvaged cores, and blood. Every piece hand-welded, every system rigged to kill. The AI embedded in the ship's nervous system was old, unstable, but loyal. Loyal to humans. Not peace, not diplomacy, just revenge. Rook stared at the dozens of blinking enemy signals. He was outnumbered. Outclassed, surrounded, exactly as planned. "Targeting array hot," the AI purred through the speakers. "Do you wish to announce yourself?" Rook's voice was calm, cold. "Open wideband." A moment later, every comm channel in Sector 9 Delta screamed to life. A voice rang out, gravelly and laced with venom. "This is Earth. You erased us. You burned our skies and poisoned our seas. But you forgot one thing. We don't stay dead. This is not a rescue. This is not diplomacy. This is retribution." Silence followed. Then, without warning, the Ashfall fired. Not a single beam or pulse. But a kinetic rod, a solid tungsten spear, the size of a freighter traveling at relativistic speed, no shields, no countermeasure. It punched through the hull of the nearest Imperial cruiser like it was made of paper. The ship didn't explode. It just ceased to exist. A hole the size of a city now sat where its spine used to be. Panic swept the Imperial fleet. And Rook smiled, the ghosts of Earth whispering behind his eyes. For the first time in over 100 years, the Empire knew fear. The destruction of the Imperial cruiser Valaris was not just a tactical loss, it was a psychological one. Never in recorded history had a ship vanished so instantly, so silently, with no warning and no sign of retaliation. One moment it stood, a pillar of Imperial authority. The next, a kilometer-wide hole hovered where its heart had been. Admiral Carvax stood motionless, his sharp reptilian eyes wide, jaw clenched. The bridge of the Ravager of Light was filled with sirens, flashing alerts. Shouting officers scrambling for clarity, but none of them could explain what they were seeing. Carvax growled. "Do we have confirmation? That was a physical strike, not plasma, not antimatter?" The technician's voice cracked. "A kinetic projectile, Admiral. Solid tungsten. No energy signature. Primitive. Brutally primitive." Carvax's eyes narrowed. Primitive. And effective. He turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast to all ships. Combat formation. Delta 5. Shields up. All forward batteries. Target that vessel and prepare to fire." A flicker of hesitation passed through the crew. Even trained veterans of the Empire's wars felt it. They weren't just looking at an enemy warship. They were looking at a ghost. Inside the ashfall, Rook didn't flinch as his sensors picked up dozens of lock-on alerts. The Empire was finally waking up. Fighters were scrambling, cruisers were repositioning, shield barriers were flaring to life. He stood on the bridge alone. Hands gripping the cold rail, his eyes scanning the tactical readouts. The ship's AI, known simply as Vox, buzzed in his earpiece. Enemy fleet response escalating. 17 ships locking fire. Estimated time to engagement, 22 seconds. "Good," Rook muttered. "Your orders?" "Overload dorsal plating. I want their first volley to think they're making progress. Then, we teach them." The AI let out something that resembled a chuckle. "As you wish, Commander." The Ashfall wasn't a ship made to survive. It was made to suffer, and to make others suffer worse. Unlike Imperial vessels, which ran on high-frequency energy shields and radiant armor, the Ashfall relied on brute mass. Every inch of its hull was forged from neutron-compressed alloys, far denser than anything the Empire had seen. Its power core ran hot, too hot, and radiation leaks were part of normal operation. Everything about it screamed wrong, which was the point. It wasn't a battleship, it was a funeral, and Rook was the last pallbearer of Earth's vengeance. The first barrage hit. Imperial ships opened fire with a mix of energy pulses, particle beams, and subatomic scatterbursts. A symphony of destruction lit up the void, blue, white, green. Any ordinary vessel would have been torn apart. But the Ashfall absorbed it all. Its plates buckled, metal screamed, molten gashes peeled across its side like wounds. But it kept moving, silent and steady, gliding forward like a wraith through hellfire. Inside, Rook watched the hull readings dip. "I want secondary turrets locked on their mid-tier escorts," he ordered. "No main cannons yet. Let's pick them apart." With a hum, the Ashfall's secondary guns rotated. These weren't elegant, precise weapons. They were blunt instruments, massive, slug-throwing, armor-punching monsters. Each turret fired with the recoil of an earthquake, sending hardened steel rounds hurtling through space. 2 destroyers tried to flank the Ashfall. They never made it. The first was struck mid-engine. It spun out of control, venting fire and crew. The second took a round directly through the bridge. Lights flickered, and then it just went dark, drifting. On board the Ravager, Admiral Carvax clenched his claws. "This can't be real," he growled. "Get me their schematics, any trace of design, any clue what they're using." "No records match," the intelligence officer said, pale and shaking. "Sir, that armor, the readings are inconsistent with modern technology. It's almost like what? Like it was made by hand." Carvax turned away, nostrils flaring in disgust. He had seen rebellion. He had crushed insurrections, burned cities, and erased civilizations. But this was different. This was personal. "They're trying to humiliate us," he hissed. "One man, one ship. He thinks he can make us bleed. Prepare the exactor cannon." "Sir? That weapon is reserved for orbital erasure only." Carvax snapped. "Do it!" Inside the ashfall, Vox's voice was colder now. "Admiral Carvax is escalating. They're charging a Class 7 gravimetric cannon. Estimated yield? City destroyer. You won't survive direct impact." "I won't have to," Rook replied calmly. He knew Carvax, not personally, but by record. He had studied every Imperial commander still breathing. Carvax had orchestrated the cleansing, the orbital genocide of Earth's final resistance cities. He hadn't just followed orders, he had enjoyed it. Rook reached for the sealed compartment at the base of the command console and withdrew a small, rusted locket. He opened it, a picture, faded. A woman with kind eyes, a boy on her lap, a family lost under Imperial fire decades ago, burned alive in the red rains of the Purge. "My turn," Rook whispered. He input a command. "Engage cloak protocol. Now." The ashfall blinked. Not cloaked, not invisible, just gone. A void of all signal, all reflection, all trace, an absence in the fabric of space. "Target lost," the technician screamed. "It just disappeared. No jump signature." Carvax snarled. "Impossible. Reacquire now." But it was too late. The ashfall was already inside the Imperial formation. It reappeared behind the Hammer of Doctrine, one of the command ships, and opened fire at point-blank range. A massive rail-mounted Mac round blew straight through the spine of the ship, ripping it in half. Debris scattered across space. Another ship turned to respond, but ashfall was already gone again. A ghost, a monster, a nightmare come true. One by one, the outer perimeter ships began to fall. They couldn't hit what they couldn't track, and what they could see didn't make sense. It moved like a fighter, hit like a god. Inside the ashfall, Rook's body trembled from the G-forces. Blood dripped from his nose. His heart felt like it was trying to escape his chest. But he wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He had lived underground for 32 years, trained with ancient weapons, slept beside nuclear waste and eaten fungus scraped from cave walls. He had watched his people fade away. Slowly, quietly. Not from war, but from being forgotten. That's what the Empire did best. Not kill, erase. And that's why ashfall existed, because Earth would not be forgotten. "Vox," Rook whispered, coughing. "Initiate burn drive. RAM protocol. Next target, the Ravager." There was a pause. Then, "Confirmed." A deep rumble echoed through the ashfall as its engines flared to life. The ship turned, pointed its nose toward the largest vessel in the sector, Admiral Carvax's command Dreadnought. A suicide run, but not without style. The ashfall roared forward like a comet of vengeance. "Brace for impact!" someone shouted aboard the Ravager. Carvax froze. His hands trembled for the first time in his career. In that moment, he didn't see a ship. He saw Earth's ghost, and for the first time in his life, he realized the Empire might lose. But just before the impact, ashfall vanished again. A decoy, a feint. The real ashfall emerged directly beneath the Ravager, targeting its ventral systems, where its shields were weakest. From a single hatch, a missile launched, glowing red, screaming through the void, small enough to ignore until it hit. Not the hull, but the power coupling. The blast rippled inside the Ravager, not outside. Fire engulfed its midsection, systems overloaded, bridge lights exploded in a shower of sparks. Carvax was thrown backward, the Ravager buckled, and the Ashfall sailed past, a silent executioner. Back aboard the Ashfall, Rook's vitals were fading. The strain was immense. The radiation from the power core was seeping through the bulkheads. The AI was beginning to shut down non-essential systems to preserve what was left of him. "Vitals critical," Vox said, almost tenderly. "We can retreat." Rook coughed again, spitting blood into his palm. "No, not yet. Not until he sees me." "Carvax?" Rook nodded. "Understood." The Ashfall rotated, positioning itself just meters from the Ravager's smoking hull. Its forward-facing camera activated. The image was broadcast directly to the enemy bridge. Through smoke and fire, Carvax crawled to a screen and froze. On it was Rook, his face gaunt, eyes burning, and behind him, scrawled on the wall in blood-red paint, the words, "You burned Earth. I'm here to return the favor." Then the feed cut, and the Ashfall charged its main cannon. They used to say the Empire couldn't feel fear, that its leaders, raised on conquest and sterilized doctrine, had bled emotion out of their veins long before taking command. That fear was for lesser species, prey species, civilians, farmers, outsiders. But on the bridge of the Ravager of Light, amid fires, flickering lights, and bleeding officers, Admiral Carvax felt fear like a noose tightening around his scaled throat. He watched the replay of the Ashfall's direct message, again and again. "You burned Earth. I'm here to return the favor." The man on the screen hadn't screamed. He hadn't made demands. He hadn't asked for terms. He was already dead inside. And somehow, that made him more dangerous than the entire Imperial Armada. "We have to jump," one of the lieutenants stammered. He was young, barely old enough to command a squad, and now his armor was soaked in blood. Some of it his, most of it not. "The ship is dying, sir. Shields are down. Hull integrity collapsing. We can't win this." Carvax didn't move. He stared at the frozen image of Rook, the sunken cheeks, the fire in his eyes, the madness, and the clarity beneath it. A single warship. One man. No fleet, no reinforcements. And yet, he had dismantled 3 cruisers, 2 destroyers, and now had the Ravager on its knees. This wasn't war, it was vengeance. 30 years ago, Carvax had personally overseen the sterilization of Earth. He still remembered the fires. The ash that blackened the orbit. The screams over civilian frequencies. They'd called for help, for peace, even as the orbital rounds fell like burning hail. The Empire didn't respond. They didn't warn. They cleansed. And Carvax, he'd called it a strategic culling. Even then, a small part of him had wondered if it had been necessary. Earth had already been broken, its satellites shattered, its atmosphere poisoned. The last resistance pockets, isolated, weak, cornered like rats in tunnels. But he had obeyed orders, and worse, he'd enjoyed the final broadcast blackout. The silence afterward, it had made him feel like a god. Now that silence was screaming back. Aboard the Ashfall, the situation was no better. The bridge lights flickered. Radiation warnings flashed red across every console. Oxygen levels had dropped by 23% in the last hour. Fire suppression systems in sections C through F had failed completely. Rook barely noticed. He was too focused on what came next. "Vox," he croaked, blood staining his lower lip. "Damage report." The AI replied, slower now, its voice losing precision. The damage had reached the neural processors. Core temperature rising. Cooling systems compromised. Estimated hull breach in 8 minutes. You are advised to evacuate. There's nowhere to go. A pause. Then Vox asked, "Would you like me to prepare a death protocol?" Rook gave a tired grin. "No, I'm not done yet." He staggered over to the manual targeting station, bypassing the damaged auto-tracking. The main cannon, Earth's final gift to the stars, was ready. One last shot. But not just at Carvax's ship. At the symbol it represented. Ashfall hadn't just been a warship. It was a failsafe. It had been built in pieces over decades by survivors who barely had the tech to melt steel. And yet they had succeeded, because they didn't care if it was perfect. They just needed it to hurt. Every inch of its hull had been etched with the names of the lost, families, cities, resistance fighters, children, burned colonies, forgotten history. And in the heart of the ship, beneath the control room, a hidden chamber. Sealed off from all systems, stored what Rook called the ledger. A record of every crime the Empire committed. Evidence, images, logs, blood trails, things the galaxy had long buried. Rook's plan had never been to win. It was to make the galaxy watch the Empire bleed. And remember why. The Ravager drifted now, not dead, but close. Its engines sputtered, secondary reactors offline, long-range comms jammed by the Ashfall's interference field. Inside, chaos reigned. But Carvax sat still. He ignored the calls for evacuation. He ignored the alarms. He was staring at a datapad pulled from the archive servers before the system collapsed. On the screen was a photo. Grainy, old, a research base, charred and half-buried in Earth's soil. Next to it, a body, a woman in a white coat, one arm clutching something close to her chest. A child, both burned, both registered as casualties during the final purge. He had seen this photo before. Back then, he had marked it as routine collateral, a clinical description. Now, looking again, the child's eyes were still open, empty, charred, but somehow still staring. It was the same gaze he saw in Rook now. That wasn't coincidence. That was legacy. Outside, the Ashfall maneuvered into position. The Empire's fleet was broken, not wiped out, but scattered, confused, afraid. Smaller ships were fleeing, jumping without formation. The bravest few remained, desperately trying to coordinate a counterstrike. But Rook knew better. The Empire had never expected to fight someone who didn't fear death. Their entire strategy had always relied on terror, overwhelming force, and psychological dominance. But Earth had already faced extinction. There was nothing left to fear. He activated the main cannon. Its barrel opened like the jaws of an ancient beast, coils glowing with overcharged energy. The cannon wasn't designed to fire repeatedly. One shot, maybe two, before the ship tore itself apart from within. "Target lock," Rook whispered. "Locked," Vox replied. "Shall I engage?" Rook hesitated, then spoke slowly. "Open fleet-wide frequency, not encrypted." Vox complied, and once more Rook's voice echoed through every ship still within the system. "This is Earth, not its government, not its army, just its ghost. You erased our name, burned our culture, stole our skies. But the stars remember. I am not the end. I am the beginning of your reckoning." He took one final breath. "Let them all know. The Empire is not immortal. It bleeds, and today it dies screaming." He gave the command. "Fire!" The cannon unleashed. A blast of molten energy, wrapped around a magnetic core, tore through the void like a falling star. It hit the Ravager not at the bridge, but at its history banks, its archives, its records, the Empire's truth. Carvac saw it coming. He didn't run, he didn't scream. He watched it, with the eyes of a man who knew he was finally being judged. The cannon hit. The center of the Ravager ignited from within. Not a blast outward, but a collapse, folding the ship inward on itself as the gravity systems failed. It wasn't an explosion. It was an erasure, a poetic death. The ship twisted, buckled, and was gone. Back inside the ashfall, silence reigned. Rook slumped to his knees. The temperature was rising fast. The air tasted like copper and burning plastic. The AI was failing, its voice distorted. Damage, irreversible, venting atmosphere. Goodbye, Commander. Rook smiled faintly. He crawled toward the command console, dragging himself across a warped floor. His hands found the manual release, the last subsystem still operational. He opened the pod embedded beneath the floor. Inside was the ledger. Rook pulled it close, strapped it into the ejection sled, and set the coordinates. A neutral planet, non-aligned. Home to scattered traders and journalists. Not warriors, witnesses. Send it, he whispered. The sled launched, slipping into void space before the ashfall lost power completely, and with it, Earth's final record escaped into the galaxy. The ashfall began to break. Decks buckled. Support beams groaned. Fires ate through every corridor. Rook sat against the far wall, head tilted back, eyes closing. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even sad. There was peace, the kind only a dead world could teach. He whispered something no one would ever hear. For Mom, for Dad, for Earth. Then the ashfall's core overloaded, and the last ghost of Earth burned brighter than 1,000 stars, before vanishing into silence. Meanwhile, on the outer edge of the system, dozens of small ships, smugglers, pirates, data merchants, had been recording everything. They hadn't planned to. They were scavengers, opportunists. But they had watched as a single human ship tore apart an Imperial fleet. Watched a dreadnought fall, heard the voice of Earth's last son, and most importantly, they saw the Empire lose. One by one, the transmissions spread, across black markets, across dead relays, across forgotten colonies, and slowly, like a fire catching dry wood, a whisper spread. Earth lives. The Empire bleeds. Ashfall has come. And in places the Empire had long thought secure, uprisings began. 2 weeks after the battle, in the lawless fringe world of Dreska 4, a former intelligence officer turned smuggler stared at a cracked datapad replaying the final transmission of the ashfall. He'd watched it 73 times. The voice of the man, Rook, if the internal leaks were to be believed, echoed in his mind. You erased our name, burned our culture, stole our skies, but the stars remember. I am not the end. I am the beginning of your reckoning. Every time he heard it, his hands trembled. He had served under Carvax once. Not as a soldier, as an analyst. Back then he'd believed in the cause, the order of expansion, the purification of unstable systems, the doctrine of silence. He had told himself Earth deserved it, that they were dangerous, unpredictable, unworthy of the Empire's gift of unity. But after watching one ship do what whole resistance fleets had failed to, he started asking the question no one dared voice out loud. What if we were wrong? That question was now everywhere, spoken in whispers, coded in street tags, hidden in hacked transmissions. They weren't asking how the ashfall existed. They were asking why it had to. Across 5 different sectors, local governors scrambled to contain what they called ideological contamination. Propaganda units were deployed. Imperial historians began rewriting logs again, reasserting that Earth had been a failed colony, riddled with self-destruction, doomed with or without Imperial involvement. But the problem wasn't facts anymore. It was emotion. The galaxy had seen something it wasn't supposed to. Not a rebellion, not a fleet, not even a coordinated resistance. They saw a man who had nothing left to lose. And he won. On the storm-racked mining world of Trathan 3, a young miner named Derek sat in a supply shack, surrounded by a half-circle of dirty, tired men and women. They were bruised, tired, soaked in copper dust from days in the acid pits. None of them had ever seen a real starship in person. But they all knew what happened in Sector 9 Delta. Derek held up a cracked projector. It hummed, then played the now-famous footage, ashfall emerging behind a cruiser, destroying it in a single shot. No words, just that moment. One of the older men crossed his arms. "What's this supposed to prove?" Derek looked at him, eyes hard. "That the Empire bleeds, just like us. You planning to fight them?" "I'm planning to make them scared to come here again." There was a long silence. Then the old man laughed, not mockingly, but in something close to admiration. "Crazy bastard!" But he didn't stop the recording. Elsewhere, in the heart of the Empire, panic took a different shape. The High Council met in emergency sessions every day. No press, no spectators, just shadowed figures in gold robes, seated around a table that stretched wider than most homes. They spoke in clipped tones, afraid of raising their voices. As if doing so would summon the ghost that now haunted their empire. "The battle was an anomaly," one said. "We have analyzed the ship's structure, impossible to replicate. It poses no threat." "It posed no threat," interrupted another. "Now it's legend, a martyr's weapon, the symbol of resistance." "And Carvax?" "Presumed dead. His dreadnought was vaporized, along with his records." A third voice spoke, colder than the rest. "Not all records. The sled was launched. The one carrying Earth's ledger, if even half of what they claim is inside it." A silence fell over the room. Every counselor knew what was in those records, the truth of the purge, the real directives, the black orders given by those in this very chamber. If the galaxy saw those, there would be no wars. There would be uprisings. In the port city of Valsin, on the free world moon of Neros, a woman named Lena stood on a makeshift podium made from broken cargo crates. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained, but her voice carried like a war horn. "He didn't ask for your allegiance," she shouted to the crowd. "He didn't come with speeches or politics. He came with fire, with truth, with justice that our systems forgot," the crowd roared. "He was one man, one ship, and he made the Empire tremble." Children sat on rooftops, listening. Shopkeepers stopped mid-transaction. Dock workers lifted their heads. Even the planetary patrol units didn't interfere. They were listening too. Not because they believed in Earth, but because someone finally made the Empire afraid. And that meant the galaxy wasn't powerless anymore. Weeks later, a quiet transmission slipped across the underweb, the encrypted black market data stream used by smugglers, pirates, and mercs. It was a file. No message, no signature, just a name. The Ledger. Encrypted with layers of codes, booby-trapped with self-deleting triggers, protected by fail-safes that had to be solved by thinking like a human. One by one, slicers began opening it, and the contents hit the galaxy like a sledgehammer. Photos, videos, documents, not just of Earth, but of all the Empire's buried atrocities. Worlds restructured, species re-educated, colonies erased due to non-compliance. Every euphemism laid bare. Real names, real deaths, real suffering, all tied to real people, some of them still in power. The news networks tried to deny it. Imperial spokespeople called it faked, AI-generated, fabricated by rebels. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen, and the legend of Rook grew. In a derelict station above the frozen moon of Threx, a group of ex-Imperial engineers huddled in secret. They had survived the purge by playing dead, burying their names, changing identities. But now they were doing something they hadn't dared in years. They were building a new ship, not a replica of Ashfall. That design was chaos incarnate. But something inspired by it, built not for longevity but for message. No insignia, no beacon, just one word burned into the hull in white fire. Return. They didn't need fleets anymore. They needed symbols. And back on a drifting asteroid somewhere between dead space and lawless trade lanes, the man who once went by the name Commander Gorin, an ex-field officer turned fugitive, watched the stars and drank from a dented flask. He'd fought in the Purge, too. Had followed Carvax without question. Had bombarded a rebel outpost that turned out to be mostly children. He hadn't been able to sleep right since. But now, he could hear something in the silence. Movement, change, hope, and guilt. He pulled out an old recording device, one he hadn't touched in over a decade. He began to speak. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice hoarse, "we didn't all agree. Some of us knew, some of us wanted to stop it. We were just too afraid. But he wasn't." He looked out the viewport. "I don't know your name, soldier, but if you can hear this, I'm sorry." On the edge of the known galaxy, a new fleet began to form. It had no flag, no central command, just scattered groups, smugglers, rebels, broken officers, civilians, each building, planning, arming, not to conquer, but to expose, to burn what had been hidden for too long. And in the dark, amid this rising storm, people began whispering the word not even the Empire could erase anymore. Earth, not as a planet, but as a warning, a lesson that the smallest voice, the last ember, the forgotten ghost, could still set a galaxy on fire. And somewhere out there, in that same dark, a signal pulsed in rhythm. Ancient, rusted, untraceable, but undeniable. A beacon left behind by Ashfall before its death. It blinked only once every 12 hours, but those who found it understood what it meant. It said just 2 words: not done. A war had not yet begun, but something worse had: doubt. It moved quietly, infecting every level of Imperial command, not through fleets or bombs, but through conversations whispered behind closed doors, sidelong glances at fellow officers, and the sound of silence every time someone mentioned the name Carvax, because no one had replaced him. The Admiral's seat on the War Council remained empty, not out of respect, but fear. Stepping into his shadow meant inheriting responsibility for what happened in Sector 9 Delta, and no one wanted their name tied to Ashfall. In the deep, cold orbit above Luxar Prime, the Crucible, a Black Ops command ship, floated alone. Inside, High Commander Thalos paced in the war room with his hands behind his back, surrounded by nervous sub-commanders and analysts. "You've all seen the footage," Thalos began, his voice sharp and dry. "You've heard the chants, the protests, the disappearances of entire patrol units. This isn't rebellion. It's infection." He paused, locking eyes with each officer. "We need to cut it out before it spreads further." One commander cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, the footage was real. The Ravager was destroyed. The man, Rook, he was former Imperial. A deserter, but—" Thalos slammed his hand on the table. "That man was a ghost from a failed world, and now he's become a goddamned religion. Do you understand what we're fighting now? Not insurgents. Faith. The kind that turns men into martyrs. The kind we haven't seen since the early expansion wars." He turned to the projection hovering over the table, a blinking galaxy map with highlighted zones of unrest, 27 planets. That was the count. Not in open revolt, not yet. But communications were dropping. Local leaders going dark, patrol fleets attacked without warning. And always, the same message painted on scorched hangars. Scorched walls, scorched bodies. Earth remembers. On the surface of Mardek 6, once a loyal trade colony, Sub-Officer Janik huddled behind a rusted cargo container, blood soaking the sleeve of his uniform. The rebels hadn't come in force. They came with one man and a comms unit. They'd hacked the city's broadcast system and looped the ashfall footage on every screen. Then they dumped crates of weapons into the hands of starving workers and vanished. That was all it took. 10 years of quiet tension boiled over in a night. Janik peeked over the top of the crate and saw the governor's tower ablaze, the Empire's flag torn from the pole and replaced with a crude symbol, a black circle surrounding a single jagged line, meant to be the silhouette of the ashfall cutting through stars. He tried to call for backup. No one responded. He wasn't even sure anyone was left listening. Across the inner core systems, military tribunals began in secret. High Command didn't call it that, of course. They called them loyalty audits. Quiet investigations of officers, intelligence heads, even engineers, anyone with a connection to Earth's past, no matter how small. Files were pulled from classified archives. Some officers were quietly detained. A few were executed. The message was clear. Forget Earth. Or join it in fire. But it backfired. Because some of those officers remembered. Not the official history. The real one. The way Earth fought. Tooth and nail, even when all hope was gone. The way it built the ashfall from bones and dirt and death. And they asked themselves, if Earth could do that with nothing, what could we do with a fleet? On the hidden moon base of Cassin 13, 3 ex-Imperial captains gathered around a table made from a melted-down interceptor hull. The room was dim, oxygen thin, power flickering. But the mood was electric. "We've got 2 cruisers," said Captain Harvin, a scar running down his cheek. "Both were declared decommissioned. We faked their destruction logs and rerouted their last jumps. Crews are loyal, or scared, doesn't matter." Captain Dre nodded. "Our slicers cracked part of the ashfall's core dump before it burned out. Ship was held together by sheer madness, but the AI framework, the combat logic, the decoy system, we can adapt that." "And the message?" asked the third, a woman with sunken eyes and a voice like rust. "You think people will follow it?" Harvin looked at her. "No," he said. "I think they already are." In the trade belt of the shimmering arc, smugglers stopped trading spice for a full cycle. Instead, they traded stories, tales of the ashfall, speculation about Rook. Some claimed he survived, that the core blast had been a feint, and he'd been extracted at the last second by a cloaked ally ship. Others said his DNA had been preserved, and that someone, somewhere, was building a second. But the story that spread the fastest was this. The Empire burned Earth. Earth built a ship from its bones. That ship didn't fight. It punished. And punishment was coming again. Back in the heart of the Empire, silence had become fear's new language. Recruitment numbers dropped by 38%. Shipyard sabotage increased by 62%. Desertion rates hit levels not seen since the last species-wide extermination campaign. High Command tried everything. Propaganda, bribes, public executions. But it didn't matter. The image had burned itself into galactic memory. One man, one ship, one cannon. And the phrase that now haunted every commander's dreams. "I'm not the end, I'm the beginning." The Empire had built itself on 3 pillars: fear, control, and silence. Ashfall shattered all 3, because fear now worked both ways. Control had become a question mark, and silence was broken. Every rebel cell across the outer rim started calling themselves Embers. They didn't claim to be Earth's descendants. They didn't pretend to be part of any great alliance. They just claimed one thing. They remembered. They remembered Earth's screams. They remembered the silence afterward. And now, they remembered vengeance. Inside a hidden archive on Eric 7, deep in the old vaults of discarded data, a girl no older than 10 scrolled through ancient Earth footage recovered from the ledger. Real Earth, not the censored nonsense in imperial schools. Forests, oceans, cities at night, music, laughter, then fire, bombardments, skies torn apart. She stared at the screen for a long time, then asked the older man beside her, "Why did they kill it?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, he said, "Because it refused to kneel." The girl nodded, and somewhere behind her eyes, something hardened. On the abandoned shipyard of Varna, a new warship was under construction. It had no name yet. Just a hull of obsidian metal and a command deck built with reinforced steel. Old tech, human tech, simpler and meaner. Its designer, a former engineer who defected after the Ashfall broadcast, carved 3 words into the ship's spine. Ashfall was first. He didn't care if anyone followed. He just needed to make sure they feared. And in a deep, encrypted transmission intercepted by the Empire's most secure network, a chilling voice played over static. "You took our sun. We took your dreadnought. You took our soil. We took your silence. You took our people. We're taking everything else." The message was unsigned. The encryption was untraceable. But they all knew who sent it. Or worse, what inspired it. The first organized assault didn't come from a fleet. It came from a lie. A false distress call echoed across the Garrick's relay, a heavily fortified Imperial satellite grid controlling communications for 14 neighboring systems. The message claimed an asteroid strike had disabled the station's main power core. A standard emergency protocol activated, requesting an engineering ship to assist. The Empire responded with a vessel from the 11th Recovery Division, staffed by a small crew of loyal officers. They never returned. 2 hours later, every screen in the sector flickered with a single phrase. "Let them feel the dark they gave us." Then the Garrick's relay exploded. Communications across an entire quadrant went black. The Empire lost its voice, and the Embers lit their first real fire. In the weeks that followed, 4 more communication nexuses were hit, some destroyed, some simply corrupted with looping signals of Ashfall's final stand. These weren't suicide attacks. They were surgical, coordinated, and backed by someone with tactical knowledge of Imperial infrastructure. Not pirates, not rebels. This was a new breed of resistance, cold, calculating, and built in the image of Earth. They didn't send diplomats. They didn't demand negotiation. They sent fire. In the heart of Imperial space, within the black marble walls of the Citadel on Orinox, Empress Talira sat alone in her private chamber, watching footage from the Ashfall again. It was the raw feed, uncensored, pulled from Carvax's flagship before it went dark. She had memorized every frame, the human's face, his final words, the silence afterward. Her advisors had stopped sending her reports. They'd tried to bury her beneath false optimism, claiming the unrest was localized, temporary, meaningless. She knew better. The Empire was no longer feared. It was bleeding. She looked down at her hands, once steady as stone, now shaking. She clenched her fists to stop it, breathing shallow. The problem wasn't the rebellions. The problem was inspiration. Rook had not destroyed the Empire with weapons. He had done it with belief. And belief, once rooted in the minds of the broken, was impossible to crush. Not without a war that would leave nothing left to rule. On a fractured mining station orbiting the storm world of Diraxis, a meeting of rebel commanders took place in secret. They called themselves the Scorch, former civilians, traitor officers, even ex-bounty hunters, united by one goal: to turn the myth of Ashfall into a reality. "We've got 3 hulls prepped," one of them said. "Old freighters, stripped and rebuilt. They're ugly, but mean." "Armor?" asked another. "Nothing like Ashfall, but layered. Low-emission plating. We can take a few hits, and the decoy system's in place." "What about AI?" The room went quiet. Then the leader, a former Imperial Navy tactician named Riven, spoke. "We're not going to replicate the Ashfall's AI," he said. "We don't have the tech, or the insanity. So what then?" He looked them each in the eye. "We put people in those ships who've got nothing left to lose." And that's exactly what they did. They found men and women whose homes had been leveled by the Empire, whose children had vanished during education programs, whose siblings had been declared enemies of peace and erased. They didn't promise them survival. They promised them a reason to die standing. And they called the new ships Coalbrand, Wraith of Terra, the Echo. Each bore the Ashfall's silhouette on their hull. Each left port with no plans to return. Meanwhile, the Empire cracked from the inside. Dozens of lower-ranked officers defected, not openly but quietly, transferring supplies that vanished in transport, leaking intel to unknown networks, faking ship destructions in border skirmishes, and reappearing months later on rebel ships. Some left behind notes with only 3 words: "We remember Earth." In the old Empire, defectors were hunted, exposed, made examples of. Now, there were too many. The bureaucracy couldn't keep up. Every time one was executed publicly, 2 more vanished the next day. And still, the message spread. At a hidden outpost in a carved-out moon beneath a red dwarf, a child no older than 13 read an old speech once delivered by a pre-Empire Earth general. His voice cracked, awkward, untrained, but honest. "You don't win wars by having the most ships. You win by having something that can't be taken. And when the enemy comes to break you, they find that thing still standing." The room was silent, not from doubt, from reverence. These weren't soldiers, they were survivors, and this was their faith now. The Empire responded the only way it knew how, with escalation. On the desert moon of Ivara 9, an entire village suspected of harboring defectors was bombed without trial, over 200 dead, survivors dragged to forced camps. The Empress declared it a necessary action to protect order. But the only thing it protected was rebellion, because the next day, a transmission surfaced across the black net. A man, face hidden by a cracked visor, stood before a captured Imperial gunship, bound officers on their knees. "You call it order," he said. "We call it genocide. You call it peace. We call it silence. You burned a world, thinking no one would rise from the ash, but Earth didn't die. It waited." He raised a weapon. No mercy, no apology. The officers fell. And with them, the illusion of Imperial authority. The 3 Ashfall-inspired warships launched simultaneous raids on remote outposts. Not to conquer, but to cripple. Coalbrand dropped out of stealth over Chorus Station, disabled the comms relay, and punched a hole through a supply freighter filled with troop weapons. Wraith of Terra attacked a fleet in formation, then vanished after releasing a false distress signal that drew ships into an asteroid minefield. The Echo launched a drone signal that broadcast the ledger on repeat across 12 civilian systems, complete with visual proof of the Empire's crimes. The Empress issued a blackout order. It was too late. The galaxy wasn't just listening now, it was reacting. On a ruined colony world, A man named Baron knelt by the grave of his wife, killed in an orbital purge 10 years prior. He pressed a piece of HFY shrapnel into the dirt and whispered, "They said Earth was gone, that there was nothing left." He looked up, eyes burning. They were wrong. He stood and walked toward the settlement's militia depot. He'd never held a rifle in his life. But something inside him had shifted, and the Empire had no name for it. The final fracture came from within the ranks. At Fort Callus, the largest Imperial training facility in Sector 4, a group of elite cadets, handpicked for leadership, staged a mutiny. They weren't rebels. They weren't even fully trained. But they'd read the ledger. They'd seen the face of Rook. And when their instructors ordered them to prepare for planetary subjugation drills, they refused. The standoff lasted 6 hours. When the smoke cleared, the academy burned. And in the ash, one phrase was scrawled across a wrecked training drone. Ashfall was a message. We are the reply. Across the stars, the Empire trembled, not from fleets, not from weapons, from the idea that Earth's ghost had taught them, even if you win every battle, if your enemy chooses to fight forever, you've already lost. The Empire launched Operation Iron Rain with the confidence of a wounded predator. It was not a precise operation, not a clean one. There were no warnings, no pre-battle declarations. It was fury in motion, a claw swipe meant to end everything. 12 fleets, coordinated across 4 sectors, descended on known rebel hotspots, mining colonies, fringe world outposts, and suspected hidden shipyards. The plan was simple: overwhelm, erase, move on. Fast and brutal. On paper, it should have worked. It didn't, because by the time they arrived, the rebels were already gone. What they left behind were messages, painted in scorched metal, carved into the bones of abandoned buildings, or looped endlessly through damaged comboys. Every site told the same story. You came for our silence. We came for your memory. You burned Earth. Earth lit the stars. The commanders didn't understand it. They didn't want to. Their reports labeled it psychological warfare, unstable ideology, misinformation. But the soldiers on the ground saw something different. Civilians weren't running anymore. They were preparing. Not just to fight, to last. They fought like Earth had taught them. No uniforms, no formations, no surrender. Hit, vanish, return, nothing to conquer, everything to bleed. The first wave of Imperial dead was passed off as expected attrition. The second wave wasn't explained at all. By the third, senior officers were requesting evacuations before they even landed. Operation Iron Rain collapsed within 3 weeks. The Empress didn't speak for 6 days. On the other side of the stars, within the shattered husk of a dead freighter drifting beyond Imperial borders, a meeting took place. 12 captains, no names, no rank insignias, no declarations of allegiance. They sat around a crude table, made from repurposed armor plating from one of the Ashfall-inspired ships destroyed in early raids. The Echo. It had gone down buying time for a civilian convoy to escape. Every captain at the table had sworn never to let its name be forgotten. Iron Rain is dead, one of them said. Not dead, wounded, another corrected. A wounded beast lashes out. Then we don't wait, said a third. We strike. With what? Someone asked. Half our ships are damaged. Our supply lines are ghosts. We don't have a fleet, we have a whisper. The room quieted. Then Riven, the man who had overseen the construction of the first 3 post-Ashfall vessels, leaned forward. We don't need a fleet. They looked at him. He tapped the table twice. A small drone rose from the corner and projected a hologram. A ship. Not Ashfall, but it carried its shape, and something more. It's ready, Riven said. Built from salvaged dreadnought plating, designed in silence, coated in everything the Empire can't trace. "What do you call it?" someone asked. He looked up, eyes burning. Resurgence! Resurgence launched under blackout conditions from a derelict repair station orbiting the corpse of a star. It didn't announce itself. It didn't send a beacon. It simply existed, and that was enough. It was bigger than Ashfall, smarter, not as fast but made for endurance, for outlasting, outmaneuvering, and returning. The AI core inside wasn't artificial. It was hybrid, a neural shell built from old rebel logs, Earth survivor interviews, and fragments of the Ashfall's core memory. It didn't sound human, but it remembered humanity. And when it first spoke to its captain, a man named Keelan, a former planetary militia officer who had watched his homeworld burn under Imperial cleansing fire, it said just one thing. "Are you ready to be a message?" He didn't answer. He just sat down in the command cradle and whispered, "Find me the largest Imperial warship in transit." The AI responded immediately. Target acquired. The Crown of Thorns was one of the Empire's elite carriers, a symbol of command presence, surrounded by escort ships and loaded with atmospheric precision weapons designed to suppress uprisings before they took root. It was a terror tool, until Resurgence tore through its flank like it was made of foil. No warning, no pre-engagement protocol, just a single concentrated kinetic strike delivered at relativistic speed. The carrier's shield failed under the impact of raw physical force, the same tactic that had made Ashfall infamous. The Crown's central command pod was punctured, decompressed, and voided in 10 seconds. Then, Resurgence sent a signal across all open Imperial frequencies. The voice was distorted, ghostly. "Ashfall was our scream. We are the echo. This is not a fleet. This is not a war. This is memory, and you cannot kill memory." The Empire lost all contact with the Crown of Thorns and its escorts. No survivors, no data recovered. What returned were recordings leaked from internal rebel nodes, footage of the destruction, overlaid with the Ashfall insignia, and a rising chorus of voices, not chanting, not singing, remembering, footage of Earth, pre-burn, cities glowing in the dark, children playing, wind moving through trees. The kind of images the Empire had deleted from public memory generations ago. But they were back now, and they were weaponized. Not to inspire hope, to invoke shame, to haunt. Inside the Imperial Citadel, the Empress called a shadow council, a meeting without records, without aides, without structure. Just her and 6 of the most dangerous minds left in the Empire. "We are losing control," she said, voice hollow. "Control is an illusion," replied the Warden of Strategic Correction. "We've always operated on fear. And they no longer fear us," she replied. A silence fell. Then the War Minister leaned forward. "I propose total planetary sterilization," he said. "Target suspected rebel systems. Burn them. No hesitation. No warnings. Show them what happens when memory tries to rise." Even he hesitated before finishing. "Just like we did to Earth." But she didn't respond, because she remembered Earth's final image too. Ashfall's cannon, aimed not at conquest, but at vengeance. "No," the Empress finally whispered. "We don't burn the stars." She turned her gaze to the void beyond the balcony. "We find the ghost, and we kill it again." Meanwhile, in the forgotten gravity well of a derelict Imperial testing facility, a data miner stumbled upon a locked signal, one buried under decades of archived black site transmissions. It was a ping, a survival ping, coming from a heavily shielded escape pod that had ejected just moments before Ashfall detonated. He didn't believe it at first, until he cracked the last layer of encryption and heard the voice. Broken, gasping, glitched. "This is Rook. If you're hearing this, I wasn't supposed to live." Earth's not gone, not really. Not yet? The miner didn't sleep for 2 days. He didn't eat. Then he sold the file to the wrong people. And within hours, the entire galaxy knew. The moment the recording leaked, the galaxy stopped pretending. It was rough, glitchy, full of static and half-dead audio. But the voice, gravel-worn and familiar, cut through everything like a blade. "This is Rook. If you're hearing this, I wasn't supposed to live. Earth's not gone. Not really. Not yet." Ashfall was only the first. That was all it took. Across 1,000 systems, the name Rook surged like fire through dry bone. People didn't care if it was real, if he was alive, if the transmission was even genuine. That didn't matter anymore. They didn't need certainty. They needed a reason to keep bleeding. And Rook had just given it to them. In the shadow of the broken moon of Carrion 5, the scattered rebel captains gathered one last time. They no longer called themselves Embers. That was over. They called themselves the Remembered. Riven stood at the center of the circular war room, scarred and exhausted, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, and systems held together by patchwork crews. "The Empire's last message was clear," he said. "If we continue, they will sterilize entire sectors. We're no longer rebels to them. We're an infection." No one flinched. Not this time. They had all seen what infection looked like, when it spread from the memory of a dead planet and took root in the hearts of the forgotten. Riven pulled up a holomap. The Empire's final bastion, Oronok's citadel, glowed red at its center. Built into the heart of a planetary fortress, its orbital defenses were near impossible to breach. Layers of shield arrays, gravity mines, interceptor rings. Impossible. Unless you weren't trying to conquer, unless you were trying to end. "We'll never have another shot," Riven said. "Their fleets are regrouping. Their fear is hardening into desperation. If they launch another wave before we strike..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room had already made peace with death. What they wanted now was meaning. The only way to get it was to deliver the final truth. The plan was madness. But then again, so was Ashfall. Resurgence would lead the strike, drawing fire, burning through defenses with kinetic rounds and obsolete stealth tech the Empire still hadn't learned how to block. Meanwhile, a group of smaller, faster ships would breach the atmosphere and reach the core archive, buried within the Empress's citadel. The goal wasn't conquest, it was broadcast. Because buried in the data pulled from the Ashfall's AI, backed by Rook's final ping, was something the Empire had never wanted the galaxy to see. Full footage of the Earth purge, the orders, the faces, the silence afterward, everything. And once that footage went public, there would be no more Empress. There would be no more Empire. Not by war, but by truth. The assault began in silence. Resurgence dropped out of void space, not with a roar, but with a hum, low and deep, as if the ship itself was growling. Its armor had been patched 36 times. It bled coolant like blood. Inside, its crew said their goodbyes long before the jump. They didn't think they'd survive. They didn't plan to. The first wave of enemy fire was brutal. Orbital cannons sliced the darkness open with molten lances. Interceptor ships swarmed like hornets. But Resurgence didn't dodge. It advanced and fired. Its first round hit a relay station. The second tore through a gravity well projector. The third, the biggest, wasn't aimed at a ship at all. It was aimed at the sky itself. A signal round. Coded, layered, hidden inside a hardened shell. It screamed through the upper atmosphere and lodged itself into the Empire's primary broadcast tower. Then it opened, and from it poured the full contents of Earth's history, unfiltered, unaltered, undeniable. People across the empire, even those still loyal, still afraid, stared as the purge unfolded before their eyes. They saw children vaporized under orbital fire, cities flattened into glass, resistance members surrendering. Hands raised, only to be executed. And finally they saw Carvax himself, smiling into the camera as he gave the order. Let Earth be remembered not as a threat, but as a warning. Now it was, but not the way he'd wanted. Inside the Citadel, chaos broke first in whispers, then in fists, then in blood. Some soldiers tore their badges off their uniforms and dropped their weapons. Others locked down sections of the palace, refusing to acknowledge the footage, screaming about deep fakes and rebel lies. But it didn't matter. The Empress stood alone in her throne chamber, surrounded by silence. The ghost had won, not with fleets, not with power, with truth. And as the walls shook under distant cannon fire and reports of breach teams reaching the outer spires, she stepped onto the main platform and accessed the last direct Imperial frequency. She spoke not like a ruler, but like a woman defeated. This will be my final broadcast. We built an empire from silence. We raised our children on victory, not memory. We burned our mistakes so they would never speak again. But we were wrong. Earth remembered. And then she was gone. No last stand, no defiant speech, just silence. One final time. In the courtyard of the Citadel, smoke curled toward the sky as Riven stepped over the shattered remains of an Empire crest. His arm was broken, side torn from shrapnel, but he walked anyway. Past dead guards, past stunned civilians, to the central terminal of the archive tower. And standing there, slumped, barely breathing, was Keelan, captain of Resurgence. He'd made it to the surface after crashing into the lower stratosphere, dragging himself through molten ground and twisted debris, bloodied and broken. He looked up as Riven approached. "You made it," Keelan whispered, coughing. Riven dropped beside him. "We all did. Every system. They saw it. All of it." Keelan nodded slowly. "That's enough, then." And he slumped backward, gone, but not forgotten. Never again. In the following weeks, the Empire fractured, not from invasion, from within. Sectors seceded, officers surrendered, some fled, some were executed. The High Command, those who survived, were put on trial by local coalitions that had formed in the ashes. But there was no new government, no flag, no central order, just memory and respect. For a world that was burned, buried, erased, and still found a way to scream. And somewhere, far from the political shifts and broken star lines, a single signal continued to pulse from the deep. Rook's original ping. It still hadn't been fully traced. Some believed he died when Ashfall burned. Some believed he was rebuilt. Some claimed he walked among the remembered, nameless, faceless, content to be myth. But no one asked any more. Because the answer didn't matter. He had done his part, and now it was theirs to carry forward. A small child, born on a colony that used to fly the Empire's flag, stared up at the night sky with her father. "Papa?" she asked. "What's Earth?" He looked down, eyes distant. "A place we forgot," he said. She frowned. "Why?" "Because we were told to." "Why'd we remember it again?" He smiled, sad and proud at once. "Because it didn't let us forget." She nodded, and far above them, through the clouds, 3 ships streaked across the stars, new, black-hulled, silent, carrying no flag. Just one symbol, the broken silhouette of Ashfall, and one message: never again.